In a salvage yard outside Tampa, there are over 400 outboard motors. Most are under 15 years old. Some didn't make it past 5. But in a small repair shop in Marathon, Florida, there's a 1987 Yamaha that just passed 9,000 hours. Same owner, same mechanic, and it still fires on the first crank. That's not luck. Manufacturers want you to believe outboards are disposable, that after a decade, you're due for an upgrade. But across the marine industry, a small group of mechanics and commercial fishermen know something different. There are rules, simple rules. Rules that separate the engines lasting generations from those rotting in junkyards. Tonight, we break them down. The marine industry operates on a principle so embedded in its culture that most people never think to question it. The average recreational boater replaces their outboard motor every 10 to 12 years. Not because the engine catastrophically fails, not because parts become impossible to find, but because somewhere along the way, they've been told it's time. Dealers have a term for this. They call it life cycle management. It sounds clinical, almost scientific. But what it really means is this. The industry has built its revenue model around the assumption that your engine has an expiration date. And that date arrives whether the engine agrees or not. The National Marine Manufacturers Association publishes data every year on outboard lifespan expectations. The numbers they cite hover around 1,500 hours for recreational use. That sounds reasonable until you talk to the people who actually depend on these machines for their living. Commercial fishermen in Louisiana routinely push their outboards past 5,000 hours. Charter captains in the Florida Keys measure engine life in decades, not years. Crab boat operators in the Pacific Northwest run the same power plants through conditions that would terrify the average weekend boater. And somehow, those engines keep running. The difference isn't the brand, it isn't the horsepower rating, it isn't even the price tag. The difference is what happens after the engine leaves the showroom. Here's something the industry doesn't advertise. Every outboard motor ships with an owner's manual. Inside that manual is a maintenance schedule. The information is all there, in black and white, explaining exactly what needs to happen and when. But there's a paradox built into modern marine marketing. The easier manufacturers make their engines sound, the less owners actually do. Walk through any boat show and count how many times you hear the phrase, low maintenance. It's become the industry's favorite selling point. The implication is clear. Buy this engine and you can forget about it. Just add fuel and go. But mechanics tell a different story. In service bays from San Diego to the Chesapeake, technicians see the consequences of that marketing every single day. Engines that should have lasted 20 years, dead at 7. Lower units destroyed by neglected oil changes. Cooling systems choked with salt because someone thought a 2-minute flush was enough. A marine technician with nearly 3 decades of experience along the Louisiana Gulf Coast put it plainly. He's seen brand new 300 horsepower outboards come into his shop at 200 hours with scored cylinders. And he's seen 1990s Johnson still pulling commercial nets at 6,000 hours. The difference, he says, isn't the engine. It's the owner. That's not a comfortable truth for an industry that profits from replacement cycles. An outboard that lasts 25 years is an outboard that doesn't get replaced. Every engine that survives past its supposed expiration date is a sale that never happens. And in a market where repower sales account for nearly 40% of outboard revenue, longevity is not exactly a corporate priority. But there's a counter-movement happening. It's quiet. It doesn't have a marketing budget. You won't see it advertised at boat shows or promoted in glossy catalogs. It exists in the repair shops, on the commercial docks, in the online forums where experienced owners share what actually works. 12 principles have emerged from this collective knowledge. Some are obvious, at least in theory. Others are surprising, even counterintuitive. But together, they form a blueprint that separates the engines measured in decades from those measured in repair bills. The rules aren't complicated, but following them requires something the industry doesn't sell: attention. The first rule sounds almost too simple to matter. Flush your engine after every saltwater use. Every owner knows this. Most believe they're doing it correctly, and most are wrong. The industry standard recommendation is 5 to 10 minutes of freshwater flushing. That sounds sufficient until you understand what's actually happening inside your engine. Thermal imaging studies have shown that salt deposits begin crystallizing in cooling passages within 90 seconds of shutdown. By the time most owners finish tying off their boat and connecting a garden hose, the chemical process is already underway. The refined rule is this: flush within 15 minutes of shutdown. Run the engine at idle for a full 10 minutes, not through muffs if you can avoid it, but through the dedicated flush port if your engine has one. And here's something no owner's manual mentions. Once a month, add a tablespoon of white vinegar to your flush system. It dissolves calcium buildup that fresh water alone cannot touch. The second rule concerns lower unit oil, and it exposes one of the industry's most persistent half-truths. Manufacturers recommend changing the oil every 100 hours or annually. What they don't emphasize is that 100 hours represents a maximum interval, not a target. Lower unit oil isn't just lubricant, it's a diagnostic fluid. That milky residue you sometimes see during a drain isn't contamination you can ignore. It's water intrusion, and it means your seals are already failing. But here's the critical detail. By the time oil turns visibly milky, damage to the gears has already begun. The rule, properly understood, is to change at 50 hours, not 100. And always drain the oil yourself or watch the technician do it. Gray oil, not black, means you've caught the problem early enough to replace seals before saltwater reaches the gearing. A 2021 survey of Mercury-certified technicians revealed that 68% of lower unit failures were preceded by at least one ignored oil change interval. That's not speculation. That's data from the people who rebuild these units for a living. The third rule addresses the fuel in your tank, and it's less about what you buy than what happens after you buy it. Ethanol-blended gasoline, the E10 that dominates most fuel stations, absorbs water from the atmosphere. In a boat that sits for 2 weeks in humid conditions, that fuel can phase separate. The ethanol bonds with accumulated moisture and sinks to the bottom of your tank. When you start the engine, it draws that water-ethanol mixture first. Fuel injectors do not forgive this. The rule is straightforward. Use ethanol-free fuel when available. When it isn't, add a fuel stabilizer with water dispersant within 24 hours of filling. And never let your tank sit below 1/4 full. The airspace above the fuel accelerates the separation process. A Yamaha master technician working the Chesapeake Bay region was blunt about this reality. He rebuilds more fuel systems from ethanol damage than from any other cause. It's not a matter of opinion, it's simply what he sees, month after month, year after year. The fourth rule involves a $25 part that protects a $25,000 engine. The water pump impeller is a small rubber component that circulates cooling water through your power head. When it fails, it doesn't send a warning light or make a strange noise. It sheds rubber veins into your cooling passages, blocks water flow, and within minutes, your engine is overheating. By the time the alarm sounds, pistons are already scoring. The rule is annual replacement, regardless of hours logged, and when you pull the old impeller, inspect it carefully. If veins are cracked, cupped, or missing pieces, those fragments are somewhere in your cooling system. They need to be found. The fifth rule concerns small pieces of metal that most boat owners glance at once a season and promptly forget. Anodes, commonly called zincs, exist for one purpose: to corrode, so your engine doesn't. They sacrifice themselves through a process called galvanic corrosion, attracting destructive electrical currents away from the aluminum components of your lower unit. But here's where casual knowledge becomes dangerous. Zinc anodes work in saltwater. Magnesium anodes work in freshwater. Aluminum anodes serve as a compromise for mixed environments. The mistake happens when boaters who trailer between salt and fresh never switch their anode material. Mismatched anodes don't just fail to protect, they accelerate the very corrosion they're designed to prevent. The rule requires knowing your water. Check anodes every 50 hours. Replace them at 50% erosion, not 75%. And if you're running brackish water, the estuaries and coastal rivers where salt and fresh mix unpredictably, aluminum anodes are your only safe choice. The sixth rule applies to every new engine, and it's the one most owners cheat on without realizing the consequences. Break-in procedures exist in every owner's manual, but the temptation to ignore them is powerful. The engine feels strong. The throttle responds. Everything seems fine. Modern outboards are precision machined to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. But piston rings still need to seat against cylinder walls. Bearings still need to wear into their journals. Running full throttle in the first 10 hours because nothing seems wrong creates microscoring invisible to the naked eye. That damage doesn't announce itself immediately. It shortens engine life by years, and the owner never connects cause to effect. The rule is to follow the break-in procedure exactly as written. Vary your RPMs. Avoid sustained full throttle for the first 20 hours, not just 10. And change the oil in 20 hours without exception. That first oil is carrying metal particulates from components wearing into their final positions. Leaving it in the crankcase is leaving abrasives circulating through your engine. These first 6 rules are the foundation. Most owners have heard some version of them, even if they don't follow them consistently. But the next principles are where real separation occurs. These are the rules that commercial operators and offshore captains live by. The practices that transform ordinary maintenance into genuine preservation. The 7th rule addresses a system most owners forget exists until it fails. Trim and tilt hydraulics operate so reliably that they fade into the background of boat ownership. The motor goes up. The motor goes down. Nothing to think about. But hydraulic fluid degrades over time. Seals dry out without regular movement. And because the system continues working until it suddenly doesn't, most owners ignore it for years. Then they find themselves stranded with an engine, locked in the full down position, trying to limp back to the ramp with the skeg dragging bottom. The rule is to inspect trim rams annually for weeping seals, check fluid levels every spring, and cycle the system fully, all the way up and all the way down. At least twice a month, even during storage. The movement keeps seals pliable and prevents the dry rot that leads to catastrophic failure. The 8th rule challenges a belief held by boaters in warm climates everywhere. Winterization, they assume, is for northern lakes and frozen marinas. Florida owners don't need to worry about such things. This fundamentally misunderstands what winterization actually protects against. A boat that sits for 8 weeks without running develops more problems than one operated through a cold winter. Fuel varnishes inside injectors. Condensation builds in the crankcase. Gaskets that remain compressed without heat cycling begin to harden and crack. The refined winterization rule applies regardless of climate. Fogging oil in the cylinders protects against internal corrosion. Stabilized fuel run through the entire system prevents varnish deposits. And here's the practice almost nobody mentions. Start and run the engine for 15 minutes every 3 weeks during the off-season. Cold starts are hard on engines, but extended periods without any starts are worse. The 9th rule requires paying attention to something most owners barely glance at. The telltale stream. That small arc of water shooting from your engine side confirms your cooling system is functioning. Most boaters check that water is present and assume everything is fine. But presence isn't the only indicator that matters. Flow rate tells the real story. A weak stream or a pulsing one signals a failing water pump or partial blockage developing in your cooling passages. By the time the stream disappears entirely, overheating is already imminent. The rule is to memorize your telltale's normal flow at idle. Know what healthy looks like for your specific engine. Check it every single trip, not just occasionally. And if the stream weakens even slightly from its established baseline, don't wait for further symptoms. Pull the lower unit and inspect the water pump before a minor issue becomes a major repair. The 10th rule transforms a component most owners view as simple equipment into a diagnostic instrument. The propeller takes abuse that no other part of your boat experiences. Striking submerged objects, grinding over sandbars, absorbing the stress of thousands of shifts between forward and reverse. Owners check for obvious damage and move on, but prop damage reveals deeper problems and simultaneously causes new ones. A bent blade doesn't merely reduce efficiency. It creates vibration that travels up the shaft into the lower unit, stressing bearings and seals with every revolution. Over time, that $50 ding from a submerged log becomes a $2,500 gear case rebuild. The rule is to inspect the prop every time you trailer your boat. Run your hand along each blade, feeling for nicks and irregularities. If you find damage, file it smoothly immediately. And if you strike something hard enough to feel the impact at the helm, pull the prop that same day. Shaft misalignment is cumulative. Small impacts add up until something breaks. The 11th rule addresses the enemy you cannot see. Every owner knows to rinse their engine after use. The cowling gets sprayed, the lower unit gets washed, and the boat goes back on the trailer looking clean. But cosmetic rinsing protects paint. Real corrosion prevention requires access. Salt doesn't just accumulate on external surfaces. It migrates into electrical connections, pooling in junction boxes, beneath mounting bolts, inside the tilt tube cavity. Owners rinse what they can see and ignore what they can't until grounds fail and gauges start displaying false readings. An independent marine surveyor working the Annapolis region described what he encounters regularly. Engines where the exterior looks showroom ready, pristine enough to photograph for a listing. Then he pulls the cowling and finds wiring harnesses green with oxidation. Salt finds a way inside. You have to go looking for it. The rule is to remove the cowling once a year and spray every electrical connection with a corrosion inhibitor. Pull the spark plug boots and inspect for green oxidation at the terminals. Check the mounting bolts where stainless steel contacts aluminum, because that junction creates its own galvanic cell even without saltwater involvement. The 12th rule might be the most important of all, and it has nothing to do with parts or fluids or maintenance intervals. It concerns the person you trust with your engine when you're not working on it yourself. The marine industry faces a technician crisis that dealers rarely discuss with customers. The average age of a certified Mercury or Yamaha technician is over 50. Training programs are underfunded and under-enrolled. Dealerships, pressed by volume demands and thin margins, push throughput over relationships. Turnover is high. The mechanic who services your engine this year may not be there next year. Owners who trust blindly often receive maintenance that was rushed or skipped entirely. The work order says the service was completed. The invoice reflects the full charge. But the impeller wasn't actually replaced. The lower unit oil wasn't genuinely inspected. The anodes weren't checked with any real attention. The rule is to find an independent technician with a decade or more of experience. Someone who builds reputation through results, not dealership marketing. Ask to see your old parts when service is performed. Request the diagnostic printout when electronic systems are scanned. Or better still, learn the basics yourself. An owner who can change lower unit oil, replace an impeller, and read a spark plug is an owner who catches problems before they compound into failures. These 12 rules aren't secrets. Mechanics know them. Charter captains know them. Commercial fishermen stake their livelihoods on them. So why doesn't the industry promote them more aggressively? The answer is uncomfortable, but unavoidable. A boat owner who follows these principles might keep their outboard for 25 years. But the marine industry's revenue model depends on a 10-year replacement cycle. Every engine that outlasts its expected lifespan is a sale that never materializes. Dealerships generate more profit margin from service and parts than from engine sales themselves. A poorly maintained engine becomes a recurring revenue stream. An owner who changes their own impeller is a customer who doesn't return. The knowledge that once passed naturally from mechanic to owner, shared at the dock, in the yard, over conversation at the fuel pump, is disappearing. What remains is marketing. And marketing has no interest in telling you that a $15,000 engine can last as long as a $30,000 one if you simply pay attention. But there are owners who never received that message, or who received it and chose to ignore it. That 1987 Yamaha from the opening of this story belongs to a charter captain named Ray Delacroix. He bought it new, mounted it on a 22-foot center console, and began building a life around it. 37 years later, the engine has logged over 9,000 hours. He has flushed it after every single trip. He changes his own oil at 50 hours, never 100. When asked if he'd ever consider upgrading to something newer, he responded as if the question itself was insulting. He estimates he spent maybe $4,000 maintaining that engine over 3 decades. A new V6 outboard costs more than his first house did. The Yamaha owes him nothing. And it still runs better than half the new equipment he sees at the dock every morning. Across the Gulf Coast, in Pacific Northwest marinas, on Great Lakes docks where old Evinrudes still idle smoothly, there exists a quiet pride among owners who've made their engines last. Not because they couldn't afford replacements, but because they understood something the industry has tried to make them forget. An outboard motor is not disposable. It's a machine, and machines reward those who respect them. The marine industry will continue selling the myth of obsolescence, new models, new features, new reasons to upgrade. But for those who've learned these 12 rules, there's a different satisfaction. The satisfaction of knowing your engine isn't counting down. It's just running. And when you finally pass it on, you're not handing over used equipment. You're handing over proof that attention outlasts marketing. That care outlasts hype, and that the best investment in boating was never the newest motor. It was the knowledge to make any motor last.